President Trump does not mince words when it comes to making threats, and he has the bombs to prove it. Satellite images captured 6 stealth B-2 bombers on the runway at Joint Base Diego Garcia on the Indian Ocean, ready to deliver on POTUS's dire warning to Iran: shutter your nuclear plans or else.
As questions mount over the possibility of a U.S.-Iran war, the Pentagon has yet to publicly acknowledge its arsenal of B-2s. And while very visible to Tehran, the American people have been kept in the dark. Joining us now to discuss this is journalist Ken Klippenstein. Welcome.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. Talk a little bit about the magnitude of this threatening message, because I don't think that the American public is really paying attention.
Yeah, so 6 B-2 bombers in itself might not sound like very much, but this is an extraordinarily expensive stealth aircraft historically, there's never been as large of a deployment as there is now. This is the largest ever forward deployed B-2 bomber situation that we've seen ever, and that's something that expert after expert has corroborated. And so I think the American people are owed an explanation about what the objectives here are, because as you pointed out at the top of the segment, the Iranians know, the U.S. government clearly knows, and when you park 6 of those out on a base, not under hangars, where they're visible to commercial satellites, to drones that are going around, that I'm sure the Iranians have, that's very clearly signaling to them and saying, hey guys, check this out. And for the Pentagon press secretary not to just say the same thing to the American people seems to me insulting, because you can't make the case that this is operational security, necessary secrecy, if you're just having them parked there out in the open. So I'd like an explanation.
You write on Substack that, I'm quoting you, if the Pentagon doesn't really want to do X because it thinks the risks are too high or because it thinks the order is ill-considered, it has an arsenal of passive-aggressive ways of gumming up the works to make sure it doesn't happen except as it wants. Like, what do you actually mean, Mr. President? Nukes, covert action, World War III, this looks like Ukraine, or worse, sir, are you sure? They could be pushing back, and in fact, the mainstream media's expectation is that they've celebrated acts of passive resistance inside Trump. Certainly during the first term, there were people who later came forward to say they did all of that, which is a long way of saying if our top national security, military experts and advisors don't like this course of action, they could do all sorts of things to obstruct Trump. Are they?
Yes, and they've done so with virtually every president. And it's something that's concerning in any case. However you feel about the president, you want civilian elected control in charge of the armed forces. That is something that is central to the American Constitution, and I think should be to any free society. And so when they move these B-2 bombers, it's possible that Trump isn't even brought in on the decision, because CENTCOM operates on its own autopilot. And so, when Trump goes around and makes these statements, some of the language has been really alarming. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a president as explicitly as Trump has threatened to bomb this country. Whatever you think of that. I mean, he is saying it publicly. We can all see what he's saying. CENTCOM then has to make the decision. U.S. Central Command, that's the combatant command in the Middle East, has to then make the decision. Okay, how do we prepare ourselves so that we can effectuate U.S. policy if the president decides that he is going to carry through on that? And the question is, to what extent is that being communicated to the White House? To what extent does Trump realize what he's saying, which could be the context of a hardball negotiation, could be something that he's completely serious about. In any case, the hand should be talking to the brain here and coordinating these things. And when they don't say this stuff publicly, that suggests that coordination is not happening, or when the White House doesn't say that publicly. And that's something that, regardless of what your position is on this issue, it would be great if that coordination could happen. And that's one of the important parts of transparency. Not only does it inform the public, it allows the government to understand and all be on the same page about what's happening.
Talk a little bit, Ken, about why Diego is a strategic base.
Yeah, so that allows them to be based, but not actually based in the Middle East proper. So we have bases all over, Qatar, another base, and it's called Muwafiq Salti in Jordan, that we stage a lot of things out of. But as I understand it, a lot of those Gulf Arab nations are uneasy with this for the very obvious reason that they are uncomfortable with escalating things to a certain point with Iran. And that in itself is a good reason that we should have a public debate about what what we think our position on this should be. Maybe people are fine with it. Maybe they like it. In which case, at least we had that debate and people are on the same page, instead of this kind of very quiet signaling, as one retired general I quote in the story mentions. This is a very clear signal to Iran. It's saying, look at our sword. This is what you'll be dealing with if you don't, come to the negotiating table, which again is the president's prerogative to do. I just wish that he'd convey that to the public so that they can have some role in saying, okay, we like this or we don't like this. Because again, all sorts of parties involved, from not just Iran, our government, but these governments in the Middle East, they clearly know what's going on. That's why we had to send them to Diego Garcia, a British base that I think we lease from, because it's not going to ruffle feathers in the same way that these very expensive and huge bases we have in, like I was mentioning, in Qatar, in Saudi Arabia, in Jordan, that wouldn't tolerate it. And the question is, well, why wouldn't they tolerate it? Okay, because it's actually a pretty, divisive and controversial point of action. All the more reason to have some kind of a discussion about it.
I think if I were to try to steelman the Trump position, I would say, well, he unlike some other members of the Republican Party, is not inherently for basically regime change in the Middle East or war with Iran. There are certainly other Republicans like Lindsey Graham who have or even John McCain before him, who very much on an ideological basis wanted a kind of larger, John Bolton from the last administration wanted a much more direct and larger confrontation with the government of Iran. I don't think that actually is Trump. I think he wants to negotiate some kind of deal and some kind of arrangement with Iran for peace, and probably the bluster he's engaged in now, as has been the case with the tariffs, is aimed at getting them to negotiate, not actually aimed at having out-and-out confrontation. But he doesn't want to say that to the American people because he doesn't want to show his negotiating hand, right? That would be the defense of what he's doing. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable assessment. But the problem is, and something I tried to explore in the article, is that when you do that, the military is taking its own set of actions, and that signals to Iran things that might not be what you intended to signal to them. And that's one of the problems with how the military conducts itself historically. They kind of they exercise a lot of discretion in saying, okay, that's what the president says. How do we operationalize that? Or maybe what do we think is smart? I mean, that's the best case. Maybe they even say, okay, well, here's what we want to do instead. All of that leads to the risk of miscommunication, which is a huge problem in military conflict generally. History is rife with examples of wars that neither party intended to happen, but through, these gradual steps on the escalatory ladder led to something which nobody intended to happen. And again, that is where transparency is really important, because that allows, again, not just the public to be brought into things, but everything to be, better understood, like what it means. But I think that you have a reasonable interpretation, and the article in the article I wrote, I'm kind of making the case for that. Communication is more complicated than just what the president is saying, because all these agencies decide how to implement it, or at worst, how to undercut it. And sunlight is how you drive that out.
Ken, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Up next, did our politics fail us during the heart of COVID? We'll talk more about that.